They thought it was just a sickness, a fever, a cough, nothing more. But within days, entire families were dead, the streets filled with silence. Then came the smell, death, everywhere. No one understood what was happening. No cure, no escape. This wasn't just a disease. This was something far worse. This was the moment when death took over Europe. It began quietly. No bells rang. No warnings were given. No signs appeared in the sky to tell the people of Europe that their world was about to change forever. Somewhere, far beyond their lands, beyond the kingdoms they knew, beyond the maps they trusted, something had already begun. It did not march like an army. It did not carry banners or swords. And yet, it was far more powerful than any army that had ever existed. Historians believe the origins of what would later be called the Black Death lie deep in Central Asia, along the endless trade routes that connected distant civilizations. These routes were the veins of the medieval world, carrying silk, spices, gold, knowledge, and unknowingly, death. For years, merchants traveled these paths without fear. Caravans moved from one city to another, crossing deserts, mountains, and empires. Ships followed, carrying goods across seas, connecting east and west in a growing network of trade. But hidden within this system, something deadly was spreading. At first, it went unnoticed. There were small outbreaks, strange illnesses that appeared and disappeared. Nothing unusual for a world without modern medicine. But this time, something was different. This time, it did not stop. The disease adapted. It moved. It survived. And most importantly, it found a way to travel faster than ever before. Rats. They lived in ships, in storage areas, in cargo filled with grain and fabric. They moved silently, unnoticed by the people who depended on trade. And on those rats were fleas, tiny, invisible, easily ignored. But inside those fleas lived the real killer, the bacteria that would soon devastate an entire continent. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it had already reached Europe. The year was 1347. In the port city of Messina, Sicily, a group of ships arrived after a long journey. At first, there was nothing unusual about their arrival. Ships came and went all the time. Trade never stopped. But something about these ships felt different. They were too quiet. No voices, no movement, no activity. When people finally boarded them, what they discovered would haunt them forever. The crews were dead or dying. Bodies lay across the decks, some motionless, others barely alive, whispering in pain. Their skin was marked by strange, dark swellings, large, unnatural growths that seemed to spread beneath the surface. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and those who were still alive were not going to survive for long. Within hours, the sickness began to spread into the city. At first, it seemed manageable. A few cases, a few deaths, but then it accelerated, uncontrollably. People who felt fine in the morning were struck with fever by night. Within a day, their condition worsened. Pain spread through their bodies. Their strength disappeared. Then came the swellings, dark, swollen lumps that appeared near the neck, under the arms, and along the body. And once they appeared, death was almost certain. Doctors were called. They tried everything they knew. They drained blood, believing it would remove the sickness. They used herbs, hoping nature would provide a cure. They prayed, asking for divine intervention. But nothing worked. Nothing even slowed it down. Fear began to spread, faster than the disease itself. People started to close their homes. Shops were abandoned. Markets emptied. The city began to fall into silence. But the silence did not mean safety, because the disease was already everywhere. It moved through the air of crowded streets, through homes, through families. Once it entered a household, it rarely left anyone alive. People began to realize something terrifying. This was not a normal illness. This was something different, something unstoppable. And the worst part, no one understood it. No one knew where it came from. No one knew how to stop it. And when people do not understand something, fear takes over. Rumors spread. Some believed it was punishment. Others thought it was the end of the world. But no matter what they believed, it did not change reality. The sickness continued, relentless, silent, deadly, and this was only the beginning. Because what started in one city would soon spread across an entire continent, and Europe was completely unprepared. From the moment the sickness took hold in Sicily, it did not slow down. It moved like a shadow across Europe, silent at first, then overwhelming. Within months, it reached mainland Italy, then France, then Spain, and soon after, it spread into England, Germany, and beyond. There were no borders it respected, no walls that could stop it, no army that could fight it. This was not a war. It was something far worse. Cities that once thrived with life began to change. Markets that had once been full of voices and movement became quiet. Church bells rang constantly, not for celebration, but for death. At first, people believed it would pass, that it was temporary. But as the number of dead increased, denial turned into fear, and fear turned into panic. The symptoms became more widely known. It began with fever, a sudden, burning heat that weakened the body. Then came chills, pain, a deep, unbearable exhaustion. And then, the signs no one could ignore. Large, swollen lumps began to appear under the skin. These were called buboes. They grew quickly, painful, dark, and filled with infection. Some turned black, others burst, and once they appeared, the outcome was almost always the same: death. In many cases, it came within 2 or 3 days, sometimes faster. There was no time to say goodbye, no time to prepare. One day a person was alive, the next, they were gone. Doctors tried to help, but they did not understand what they were dealing with. Some believed the disease was caused by bad air. Others thought it came from the alignment of the planets. Many turned to religion, praying, confessing, seeking forgiveness, but nothing worked. And soon, even the doctors began to die. The people who were supposed to save lives could not even save themselves. Hospitals became places of despair, not healing, not hope, just waiting, waiting for the inevitable. As the death toll rose, cities began to collapse under the weight of the crisis. There were too many bodies, not enough people to bury them. Mass graves were dug outside city walls, large pits where bodies were thrown together without ceremony, without names, without dignity. Sometimes, the living were buried alongside the dead, because no one had the time or the strength to separate them. The air itself became unbearable, a mixture of smoke, decay, and fear. People began to avoid each other. Neighbors stopped speaking. Friends stayed away. Even families began to break apart. Parents abandoned children. Children abandoned parents. Not because they did not care, but because they were afraid. Because getting close meant one thing: infection. And infection meant death. Trust disappeared. Human connection disappeared. Survival became the only thing that mattered. In their desperation, people searched for answers. Some blamed outsiders. Minority communities were attacked. Violence spread. Entire groups were accused of causing the disease. Because when people cannot understand something, they try to find someone to blame. But no matter how much they searched, there was no answer. There was no enemy to fight, no leader to defeat, no strategy to win. The Black Death continued its path, unstoppable, relentless, indifferent to everything. It did not care who you were, rich or poor, powerful or weak, religious or not. Everyone was the same. And as the months turned into years, one truth became impossible to ignore. Europe was losing, not a battle, not a war, but something far greater. It was losing its people, its structure, its sense of normal life. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Because this was not something humanity controlled. This was something that controlled humanity. By the time the worst of the Black Death began to fade, Europe was no longer the same world it had once been. The transformation was not gradual. It was sudden, violent, and irreversible. Entire regions had been emptied. Villages that once echoed with voices and daily life now stood in complete silence. Doors left open, homes abandoned, fields overgrown. In some places, there was no one left to bury the dead. The scale of loss was beyond anything people had ever experienced. Historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population was wiped out during the Black Death. Millions of lives gone, not in centuries, not in wars, but in just a few years. The impact of this loss was everywhere. Cities that once depended on trade and labor began to struggle. With so many people dead, there were not enough workers to maintain the systems that once kept society functioning. Fields went unharvested. Food production dropped. Entire economies weakened. But within this collapse, something unexpected began to happen. For those who survived, the world had changed in a way no one could have imagined. Labor, once cheap and easily replaceable, suddenly became valuable. Workers were no longer desperate. They were needed. And for the first time in generations, they had leverage. Peasants began demanding better conditions, higher wages, more rights. Landowners, who once held absolute control, were forced to negotiate. Because without workers, there was nothing. This shift began to weaken the rigid feudal system that had dominated Europe for centuries. Power slowly started to move. Not immediately, not completely, but noticeably. The balance had changed, and this would shape the future of Europe in ways that would unfold over the next centuries. But the economic changes were only part of the story. The psychological impact was even deeper. People had seen death everywhere. They had watched entire families disappear. They had lived through something that defied explanation. And this changed how they saw the world. Faith, which had once been unshakable for many, began to weaken. People had prayed. They had begged for help. But the suffering continued. For some, this created doubt. For others, it created fear. Art began to reflect this shift. Themes of death became more common. Paintings, writings, and stories focused on mortality, on the fragility of life, on the idea that everything could end at any moment. The concept of memento mori, the reminder of death, became deeply embedded in culture. Life was no longer seen as stable. It was unpredictable, temporary, and fragile. The Black Death also changed how people viewed each other. Trust had been broken. During the height of the plague, people had abandoned one another. Families had been separated. Communities had collapsed. And even after the disease faded, those memories remained. The scars were not just physical. They were emotional, deep, and lasting. Yet, despite everything, Europe did not disappear. It adapted. Slowly, cities began to recover. Populations began to grow again. Trade returned. Life, in its own way, continued. But it was not the same life. It was a different world. A world shaped by loss, by fear, by survival, and by a deeper understanding of how fragile everything truly is. The Black Death did not just kill millions. It changed the direction of history. It reshaped societies. It altered economies. It transformed beliefs. And it left behind a lesson that still echoes today. That even the greatest civilizations, even the most powerful systems, can be brought to the edge by something that cannot be seen and cannot be stopped. For those who lived through it, it was not just a disease. It was the moment when the world itself seemed to break. And when it finally ended, nothing was ever the same again.